Tougher regulations for Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Human rights activists warn new restrictions on them increase the risk of exploitation and abuse. So what's the motivation of the Lebanese? And will the crackdown deter Syrians from leaving their war-torn country? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme with me, Peter Dobbie. Now, Syrians living in Lebanon are at risk of exploitation and abuse because of new residency laws. That's the warning from Human Rights Watch, which says the majority of Syrians who fled to Lebanon to escape persecution and war have, in effect, now lost their legal status. Under the new Lebanese regulations, Syrians over the age of 15 must now pay a fee of $200 to renew residency permits. That's a big request when sometimes one child worker earns $16 a week to feed a big family who can't work. On top of that, Syrians must find a sponsor to stay in Lebanon. It can cost $1,000 per person to find that sponsor. Lebanon is hosting more than 1 million Syrian refugees. Human Rights Watch is warning their community, which is already struggling to survive, could be pushed further underground, forced to work illegally and risk being abused.
He said that if I became his girlfriend or fiancée, I'm ready to give you whatever you want. I'll give you a residency permit and help you with rent and so on. He said, I just want you to know that I'm the son of the local chief and I'll burn anyone who doesn't listen to me.
Well, we'll bring in our main guest in a moment, but first we're going to talk to Khalil Gebara, advisor to Lebanon's Minister for the Interior. He joins us from Beirut. He didn't want to take part in the broader debate. Mr. Gebara, exploitation and abuse, you're generally okay with that then?
I believe that this claim is very exaggerated and doesn't reflect the right situation on the ground in Lebanon. This system is not new, first. The renewal of residencies and the fees to renew residencies for Syrians is not new. It has been in place for a very long time.
It's been in place for a year, sir. Just to be clear, it's been in place for 12 months. That's not a particularly long time.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's a little. No, this is not actually is the right way to put it. The border measures between Lebanon and Syria have been introduced last year. The border measures, but the idea is that the fees for renewal of residencies were not introduced last year. They were in place from before the start of the Syrian crisis. The difference this time, and that's the confusion, the difference this time is that historically Syrians can enter Lebanon easily and get automatically for free 6 months residency, then leave Lebanon, go back to Syria, and then they re-enter Lebanon and get another 6 months. And they used to do this as long as they want to stay in Lebanon. What happened is last year, after the government decision, there were introduced border measures, hence Syrians cannot easily leave Lebanon and re-enter Lebanon again. Hence, they have to renew their residencies from inside Lebanon like all other nationalities do, and hence they have to pay the $200 as annual residency fee.
Why do you use the word, sir, confusion? Because 95% of the people that Human Rights Watch spoke to say they are being forced to pay this fee. They don't have the money to pay the fee, therefore they don't have residency, therefore they are trapped in a vacuum. They can't go forwards, they can't go backwards. What are they supposed to do?
I mean, the use of word forced means that someone is forcing them, whereas this is Lebanese laws and regulations. And these laws and regulations are in place, and the Lebanese government has to, and as you know, that have to apply by the Lebanese laws and regulations. So the use of the word force means that someone is forcing them to do something which is illegal, whereas no, these are the Lebanese regulations, and it's part of the Lebanese laws.
But they are being forced. They are being forced into something that they can't deal with.
On Lebanon.
They are being forced into a situation of
Yeah, but,
exploitation. Just let me finish
no,
the point.
they
They are
have-
being
they are-
forced into
they
a
are not for- they
situation
are- I mean,
of exploitation.
If you are saying, I don't believe that this is the right way of putting it. They are forced to obey by the Lebanese laws.
But the Lebanese laws,
that's what they are forced to.
if we accept what you're saying,
if there are incidents, but if there are incidents of,
if we accept what you are saying,
but
sir,
I don't
the
know why you
Lebanese
don't want me to finish
laws,
my sentence.
the Lebanese laws
I don't want-
mean that these people are tethered in Lebanon. Because if you look at the flow of refugees from Syria to Europe, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. They want to leave Syria, travel through Lebanon, and then get someplace else. You're stopping them going forwards, and you're stopping them going backwards.
Of the past last week, thousands of Syrians used Lebanon to leave towards Turkey before Turkey introduced visas. The Lebanese, they were able to move freely inside Lebanon. This is, no, that's, again, I believe that the way the picture is being put that the Lebanese government is forcing Syrians towards exploitation is very exaggerated. There is more 1,200,000 Syrians in Lebanon. For every 4 Lebanese, there is 1 Syrian. If there are few incidents of exploitations, first, the Lebanese authorities did not know about that, and neither local organizations nor international organizations reported these incidents to the Lebanese authorities, so we can basically look at these cases. What's happened is that Lebanon basically is trying to find the balance between its obligations, humanitarian obligations, and between applying our laws and regulations and preserving our sovereignty and ensuring the stability of Lebanon.
Okay,
The
on
Lebanese
that
government
issue
and the
of
security agencies are overstretched,
of
as you know.
obligations, can I just ask you a question about obligations? Let's go back in time. December the 10th, 1948.
Please.
48 countries
Yes.
sign up to a thing called the Universal Declaration of
Yes.
Human Rights, and therefore you are signed up to everything that's morphed into. You are now, it would appear, riding a coach and horses through the legislation. You are not abiding by a document that you signed up to.
But why? Please give me the example of which part of the document we are not abiding by, because I mean you cannot make this claim without using for which text. I mean, first we are not a signatory of the Geneva Convention on Refugees, which is very much relevant to the issue of the Syrian refugees. Hence, that's one. But at the same time, we are signatory of the treaty against torture. Hence, what's not mentioned in the report is that even if Syrians they don't have legal residencies, they will not be deported because they don't have legal residencies inside Lebanon. And
I'm
this is
actually
something
talking
very
about.
important
I'm talking
that we
about
need also to
Article
highlight.
14.
And this is where I speak.
I'm
This
talking
is
about
what-
Article 14, brackets,
Yes.
number 1. You did sign up to that, sir. I've looked at it online today. The
Yeah.
signature is there. On top of that, if you signed up to that,
Yeah.
and if you value people's human rights, why is it that as recently as last Friday, your government put 200 people on a plane back to
Yes.
Damascus to a very, very uncertain future?
Are you going to let me reply to this, or are you going to interrupt me again?
Yes, sir, please reply.
Because what you said again is not the complete. Yes, it's not the complete picture, and this is our problem with the reports coming up from local organizations to national organizations. They don't reflect on the actual case. What happened? We didn't deport anyone last week. Last Thursday, 407 Syrian citizens coming from Damascus using Lebanon as a transit, and here the emphasis is a transit, not being registered with UNHCR as refugees, using a private airlines called Shamwings, which has a close relationship with the Syrian regime, trying to go to Istanbul before the deadline of the air travel visas by the Turkish authorities. What happened is that, for reasons we don't know what they are, the private airline companies they wanted to use did not take off from Beirut. So the Lebanese authorities returned these passengers, and here they are passengers, they are not Syrian refugees, back to Damascus on the same airline companies airline company who was supposed to take them to Istanbul. And here is my questions. Why deporting? They were in Lebanon for less than 24 hours because they were using Beirut as a transit. More than 1,200,000 Syrians used Beirut International Airport last year. Can we consider all these 1,200,000 as refugees? That's what's the story of last week. But unfortunately, no one mentions that the burden of this crisis on Lebanon, but on the contrary, everybody is mentioning what Lebanon should do, but no one is mentioning what the Lebanese government and Lebanese people are doing. And that's is the problem. And no, for the example you mentioned, they were not deported, they were not refugees, they were simply Syrian passengers trying to arrive to Istanbul before Turkish authorities' deadline for the air visas.
Mr. Gebara, thank you very much for joining us here on Inside Story. OK, let's bring in our other guests for their thoughts on this story. Joining us from Beirut, Bobseine, Lebanon researcher for Human Rights Watch, and in Paris, Anne Hammerstadt, Honorary Senior Research Fellow at the University of Kent and specialises in refugee movements and migration. Haley, at its worst, what are the problems that people are facing?
Thank you. So over the past year, we've documented lots of cases of abuse and exploitation of Syrian refugees, basically because they've lost their legal status. We've documented cases where, for example, children are working all day, every day in dangerous conditions to provide for their families because the father cannot go out and work because he's afraid of being arrested for not having legal status. There's ongoing exploitation and abuse of women in the workplace where they have to often endure these exploitative conditions in order to feed their families. In other cases, there are children who are not able to access education because even though the Minister of Education has said that despite whether or not a child has legal status, that they can enroll in school. In practice, this hasn't always been the case. So children are being denied access to education, they're working in exploitative conditions, and men, women, and children are being subjected to arrest and ill treatment for not having legal status. And this has affected the vast majority of Syrian refugees here in Lebanon, and the vast majority of them do not have legal status.
And in Paris, do you accept the logic of the government, which seems to be it's better to try to do the right thing wrongly instead of doing the wrong thing right? The undertow is we simply can't afford to look after all these people.
Well, I think there is a lot of sympathy with Lebanon for their situation. They have a lot of refugees and a small population themselves. Similar for the other host countries in the region around Syria, they have a very big refugee population that they have to deal with. They are following the same logic as a lot of other countries, I must say. I mean, there's a big debate in Europe going on now after letting in something like 600,000 Syrian refugees into Europe last year. A lot of countries are now talking about finding restrictions there as well. Border control is being put in place in a lot of countries, including the Nordic countries, Sweden, Germany, Austria, and now it keeps moving away from Europe, and we're now seeing it also in Lebanon and Turkey, so there's a sort of wave effect going on. In Europe, you also see countries like Norway, which have always been a staunch defender of the UN Refugee Convention, are now actually talking about maybe we need to reconsider the principle of asylum. So there's a big debate all over the world at the moment, and it's partly because of the enormous size of the Syrian refugee problem. It's also because there's a broad global refugee problem. There's a peak in refugee numbers that we haven't seen for many years. There's also a huge international migration debate more generally going on. We're also at the peak of international migration, both voluntary and forced. So it is difficult not for governments all over the world it's difficult for them to separate the refugee and asylum issue away from their overall concern with immigration and migration.
Is there a way around the system, Haley, as far as your people who are doing the research on the ground are concerned? Is it possible to circumnavigate these protocols so that people can either go to another place before they're allowed to carry on a safe journey to a better life, to a safe life?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the options for Syrian refugees are rapidly decreasing. We saw recently how Turkey implemented new regulations for Syrians attempting to enter Turkey by sea or by air. And I mean, the vast majority of Syrian refugees really have no place to flee to. So it's really important for when refugees do arrive in their country of asylum to have policies in place which can protect those refugees and not exacerbate social problems in those countries, which we believe that the current policy in Lebanon is doing.
And you've already touched on this idea. I get the feeling that you do detect a hardening in the stance, a hardening in the attitude. Germany this month has started sending people back to Austria. If you look at the economy of Lebanon, consumer confidence figures are going down very quickly, and debt is running at 10.2% of GDP. So whoever you're talking about here, the fiscal imperatives are lacking.
Yes, I mean, I think in the case of Germany, they do actually need immigration. They need immigrants. They have an aging working population, but the numbers that have arrived as asylum seekers in 2015, something like 1.1 million asylum seekers, new asylum applications to Germany, only Germany last year. It means these are not people who can join the workforce straight away. They will start out as a burden on the system, and only later on, when better integrated, will they be able to be a positive, to have a positive impact on the economy. So if you think long term, then the issue is not too problematic for Europe. But the short term, countries are feeling overwhelmed. I think Germany thought earlier in 2015 that by having a more open stance, other countries would follow suit within Europe, within the EU, and you'd have some burden sharing mechanism. That hasn't worked. There's been very little cooperation and a lot of mutual recrimination within the European Union. And I now think it looks like very much a hardening stance all over Europe against asylum seekers, less against Syrians than many other groups, because Syrians were only about half of the people who arrived last year to seek asylum in Europe. But there is a sense in many European countries that they can't cope with so many people coming through the asylum system, which is quite a laborious, cumbersome, expensive system, and something else needs to be done. But no one seems to think that they want to be part of that new thing that needs to be done. So there is a hardening of attitude, but not much going on in terms of finding positive solutions that will still contribute to protecting refugees who need protection.
Well, Lebanon isn't the only country enforcing new visa regulations on Syrians. Turkey has recently imposed restrictions on Syrians flying in or arriving by sea. Turkish government leaders say the new laws target anyone attempting to enter Europe illegally, not Syrians entering by land. Turkey hosts 2 million Syrian refugees. Now, from Turkey, many attempt treacherous journeys to reach wealthier European countries through Greece, Macedonia, Croatia and Hungary. It's imposed border controls and built a fence to keep the refugees out. Haley, as far as the people who are in the know of this problem in Lebanon, if you're working in an economy that in effect, I guess, is flatlining, and you can employ a child labourer for $16 a week, are these people, they're not doing this in isolation, I mean, are they overlooking the moral dilemma that they may or may not have to address because they can get cheap labour for a few bucks every day?
Yeah, I mean, it's a system whereby, because refugees don't have legal status, especially we've heard that employers tend to prefer to hire young children or women because they've said that they are easier to exploit and they can pay them lower wages. So this is definitely not something, this is facilitating the abuse of refugees, and it's also something that's, facilitating problems within the community itself, which includes Syrians and Lebanese as well. So it's obviously a negative policy that we hope will be reformed.
When you were listening to the relevant government spokesman who we talked to at the top of the program, what was going through your mind when you were hearing his reaction, just saying, this is what we've got to do, and it's not as bad as Human Rights Watch says it is?
Right. Well, I agreed with him when he was saying, Lebanon is bearing a huge burden by hosting all these refugees. When we compare the number of refugees Lebanon is hosting comparatively to the number of Lebanese people in Lebanon, it's staggering. And, it doesn't compare to the European countries, the US, and other countries that have started to host Syrian refugees as well. But one thing that I would like to say is that I had this sense that, well, this is the policy and this is the way it is. And I think there should be more reflection on this policy by politicians and others in the government to realize that actually some of these policies are harming the Lebanese community as well as the Syrian refugee community, and that there are actually some easy fixes that could be made to make things better in Lebanon for everyone. In the report we call for waiving of the renewal fees. You talked earlier about the fact that refugees have to pay $200 per person to renew their residency, and that's just refugees who are surviving on $16 a week and eating one meal a day. Yeah. There's just no way that refugees can pay that fee. So what's happening is refugees are being pushed underground. The government's not documenting where they are. They're engaging in these work situations where there's a lot of exploitation and abuse. If they are subjected to this abuse, they can't go to the authorities, because if they go to the authorities and complain, they could be arrested themselves for not having legal status.
Looking at the broader picture again, just to interrupt you, Haley, for which I apologise.
Lebanon with the war going
and Hammerstadt in Paris, looking at the broader picture again, if there is to be a bold initiative, either in Europe or on the borders of Europe as it looks east, or indeed across the Middle East, what would that bold initiative be? Who would fund it and who would drive it?
That's a big question and a very important question. The international community has worked together before in big refugee crises, for instance, with the Vietnamese boat people, which is now 20, 25, 30 years ago. In that case, you had the combination of the UN with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. You had major donor states like the United States, Canada, European countries, and you had, crucially, also the local host countries that bore the biggest burden of the refugee situation, all on board with a big, broad agreement on what should be done. And you should have ports of harbour for first asylum in the near region, but then resettlement programs where the refugees could move on relatively quickly onto places like France, the US, Canada, Northern Europe, etc. But it would be done orderly, and it would be done through the UNHCR. That would be ideal, I think, for Syrian refugees. But of course, the Syrian refugees are not the only refugees that need protection right now, so we mustn't forget other refugee groups either. But there doesn't seem to be anything like that on the table at the moment, where there is a proper negotiation. And America, for instance, seems to be not really interested in this debate. It's somehow become a European problem, and it's somehow become a problem only for the countries in the near region. And I think it should be seen as a broader international problem, and it should be seen also very much linked to conflict resolution, attempts at doing something with the actual conflict in Syria, because in the end, it's not sustainable, the situation where it is now, and even resettlement is not going to be the a solution that will make everyone happy. I mean,
Okay.
the European Union has some sort of resettlement program right now, but one thing that's been found out is that lots of refugees are not actually interested in this refugee resettlement program. They want to go to Germany, or they want to go to Sweden. They don't want to be resettled in Luxembourg or Belgium.
OK, we have to leave it there. I'd like to say thank you to our guests today, Hayley Bobseine in Beirut and Anne Hammerstadt in Paris. Well, the debate continues on our Facebook page, of course, or tweet us AJ Inside Story, or talk to me on Twitter. I'm AJ Dobbs. You can leave your comments on the programmes page of our website, aljazeera.com. From me, Peter Dobbie, and everyone on the team here in Doha, thanks for your company. We're back at the usual time tomorrow. See you then.